ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial. My name is Matt Petrowski. I've been working with FileMaker for over 30 years, and I'm teaching you everything I know about this environment. If you are interested in accelerating your FileMaker learning, head over to FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at setting up our environment within FileMaker. That's going through our settings, and we're following on with a previous video which had some somewhat complex content, but it's just stuff you need to learn if you want to be a FileMaker developer. All right, thanks for joining me here on my desktop. And what I'm really taking the time to go through every single thing so that I don't miss a detail. And I'm sorry if there's some of you that this is like, oh, well, I already know that. Well, then you're just going to put me on fast forward, skip through it, whatever it is. So a lot of people ask me, how do you develop? And that's when I am working with somebody and they have always worked with FileMaker locally on their machine to create their file. That is not a good way to develop because you risk potential corruption. There are times that FileMaker crashes. So we can see up here in the corner that I have a little thing running, and that tooltip is telling you it is Docker Desktop. So as I select on that and go to the Show Dashboard, this is the primary way that I develop all of my FileMaker development. Now I go in a couple extra steps that you may or may not have to do, and if you're interested in using Docker, I have a video on YouTube that walks through the whole process. There is one thing in particular, at least on a Macintosh, that when we go to our settings, when you're installing FileMaker or working with a container, I'm not going to go into containers in this video. There is a setting as we scroll down which becomes pretty critical that deals with permissions, that you'll hit that problem. It is this right here, where choosing a file sharing implementation for your containers. Initially, you will need to set it to gRPC Fuse, and that is because this does not have the permission issue problems that this does, and this is what Docker Desktop defaults to, and that's one of the primary reasons that people hit issues when they're trying to reference that video of using Docker locally to develop. But Docker aside, because you are able to install FileMaker Server on your actual machine. Now, the problem with installing FileMaker on your machine, your laptop, your desktop, whatever it is that FileMaker wants to always be running, FileMaker Server, that is. And that's not always the case that you want to have happen. Now, what I'm going to do is I need to go back to that dashboard. I need to install or start my instance. So I'm going to click Start. And that's not going to happen right now because you can see right here that I've got ports. There are ports that are open. All right, so this is great actually as a problem to have happen. We'll switch over to FileMaker. Because FileMaker is running, one of the things that FileMaker does is FileMaker long time has had both peer-to-peer support, meaning you can connect to a copy of FileMaker from another copy of FileMaker, and the ability to connect client to server. Now, Claris supports and promotes connecting to client to server. That is how they make money. I don't know if it's actually cannibalizing their market, but there are some people still using this feature, but FileMaker has for a long time said that they're going to deprecate this. Looking at FileMaker, when we scroll in down here, one of the items that we have is sharing, and there's the ability to have a copy of FileMaker share peer-to-peer, meaning one copy shares to another copy of FileMaker. So when this copy of FileMaker started up, that is actually what was happening. So I need to close this FileMaker down. When I close it down and go over to my Docker, when I click this Start button now, I will actually get a start. Now, FileMaker Server started that fast. As fast as I snap my fingers, I have a copy of FileMaker Server that is running. And if I go to, and this is where I take the extra bit of effort, if I go to local.hub/admin console sign-in, you can see that on my machine within a container, which I can shut down, FileMaker Server is running. This is what I consider to be the best way to develop. And the reason is this. FileMaker isn't running on your actual machine, meaning it always wants to run. I used to do that, and you could write a script that would tell the there's a number of, well, let's just open up the, actually it won't show in this particular case because I was thinking of going to the activity monitor. And within the activity monitor, it shows you a list of all running processes. I would typically be able to see all of the running FileMaker processes if FileMaker server was running on my machine. But it's not running on my machine per se. What it's doing is it's running in a container underneath my host or alongside my host or above my host, depending on the graph or how you see that. So within this, I could log into this and show you all of the individual services that you need to know about and be aware of as a developer. There's multiple. I think there's about 5 of them. But it isn't really critical to what we're learning in this video about setting up the environment. Long story short, I use a FileMaker server through Docker, and that is what is hosting my files. So if I log in here, I would be able to see all of my files. Well, I'm going to switch over to FileMaker because we're not going through server right now. I don't have FileMaker running at this point. We'll open up FileMaker. I'll use 22. I am going to open up a file. And the whole point of this series that we're walking through is we are creating a launcher for ourselves that is a little bit better than what FileMaker gives us here, and I am going to open that. So when I open a file, it's going to ask me for a local file right here, and I do have this option right here of add a hosted app or a local app. I will add a hosted app. Now it's key to know that you don't have to go into this particular dialog. If this was closed and I went up to the file menu, I do have, where is the show hosts right here. This Command-Shift-O is what I'm used to for opening a host. So if I'm in FileMaker, I do Command-Shift-O and it gets me into this same place. At this point in time, you can add as many different FileMaker hosts as you want. My host is on my local machine, and I have set up such that my DNS recognizes the static IP that I've assigned to my machine as a particular named host. In this particular case, it happens to be a host of local.hub. So that's going to resolve to the IP of my machine. And as we saw, my Docker is mapping certain ports, all of the ports that FileMaker server needs, and routing them into the container. So with that, I can click save, and what comes up is the dialog we're all familiar with as FileMaker developers. It's giving me a prompt. Now there's a key thing here that you can save some time if you're interested in doing so. This account name, I tend to use my same account name, whereas a lot of files, default files, start with admin. It's good to know that you can actually set this by going into your FileMaker preferences. So now that I've added this particular server, I'm going to be able to add files to it. But if we go up to the FileMaker settings, which we're going to be walking through, we can see that in there is a username. Now I am using, and it just so happens that my system name happens to be the same as the name that I use for files that I will log into. I can use this other option, and if you're using admin or you're using root or you're using something obscure in order to reduce the potential of vectors for attack, then that's something that you can do. But setting that name to be the same as the name that you typically log in with full access to your files for development just saves an extra step. So now I've got the local hosts, and we'll click cancel right here. So when I select on any one of these, it initially gives me that prompt to log into a file. Now in FileMaker, we have the ability, which some users and developers don't know about, which can be quite convenient. And let's take a look at where that is. It is when a file is open, having the ability to hide that file so that server doesn't actually show it. So if I go up to my recent here and open the testing that I was working with in the previous or the first video, where we've got our nice little open the key 3 areas that we learned about in the previous video, which if you are interested in that, there will be a link down below where you can click to go look at it if you just found this video. So if we go to, on any given file, to the sharing section, and we go to the Share with FileMaker clients, what we're going to see is a number of settings that we are interested in from the standpoint of a developer. Now, first off, we can see what I was talking about when I tried to start up my Docker and things weren't working. This right here is the setting that is intended to be deprecated, but still is working even with FileMaker 22. That is the ability to turn on or off the FileMaker sharing. And that's where you're able to use peer-to-peer still to this day. They haven't actually turned it off, but it is still working. Just don't be surprised when they do turn it off, or this doesn't appear here in this area. But one of the things that we can see is with any given file, whether it's hosted or whether it's local, we have the option to set the network access to this file, network access, which deals with the peer-to-peer, but also deals with, this is probably setting a privilege set, but most importantly, this don't display in hosts file list. If we check this particular box and we were to put this file up on FileMaker server, when we go into that dialog where it's going to list all of the files that we have access to, this file in particular would not present itself. It would not show up. It doesn't mean we wouldn't be able to get to it. We're always able to get to it if we know the name of the file, the path in this particular case. So I'm showing you that because, as an example, as a FileMaker developer, what you need to know that you are able to do, we'll hide that, take that off screen, and we will open up our dialog box here. So when I put in my credentials, if I put in my password here, FileMaker would now list all of the files that I have available to me. If I do not have a particular file that is going to show for me, and it's not already been added into my FileMaker startup, which we're going to put, then we're always able to go to this little icon right here, which becomes critical for us as a developer, where we can open a specific path. So with the server selected, when I click this and I now have my path, I know that I have a file called launcher.fmp12, which I don't need the extension, on my host. It is hosted on my FileMaker server. I click open. The dialog came up off screen. We can see that it is secure, so I am running a local network certificate, and I can put in my password here, and that is going to log me in. I'm also going to get the MBS plugin prompt right here, but we can see the launcher that I use, which is basically a FileMaker file, to launch into any other FileMaker file that I'm working with. Because I'm using FileMaker, it allows me such a greater degree of control that using FileMaker's method just really isn't something that I like to use. Now at this stage, we're going to compare and contrast the two. In a FileMaker file, you can do whatever you want. In the FileMaker app, you're limited to whatever they have here. Now, in the recent, what it's going to show you is it's going to show you I've got that testing file that I was working on. I've got the launcher now. I've got two different areas, my favorites, and I've got my recent. With my favorites, I can right-click this and choose Add to Favorites. And what we're going to see is as FileMaker switches me, it took that big dialog area where it had the two options of from local or from host, and now puts my launcher here. Now, this icon can be controlled within the settings of the file, or within the file settings versus my application settings. What we're going to be doing now is going through the application settings of setting up the environment that I want to work in as a developer here in FileMaker. And then we'll take a look at the file settings and go through those. Okay, so first off, let's walk through the application settings and see what you might want to set for yourself as a developer, why I suggest certain settings. Hitting Command, comma, we can walk through them one at a time. Let's actually get this window by itself on screen and just go through them so that we are familiar when we're working in FileMaker. Allow drag and drop. Yes, I love that. Show recently opened files. I happen to bump this as high as possible. 99, FileMaker will tell me I can only go up to 30. Again, this is a value that is stored within that plist file within your preferences folder, and it's used across all versions of FileMaker. Use manage database dialog to create files. Yeah, that's fine right there. Reset dialog sizes and positions. This is if you've got dialogs all over the place, which I have never used this feature, but I guess if you got one off screen or on a monitor and reconfigured your monitors, maybe you would need to use that. Username we've already talked about. Delete cached temp files. This is something that's been added in recent years. I mean, within the last 5 years or maybe even less. It becomes very important when you're getting things or having to troubleshoot. As FileMaker, its pace of increased development and releases has changed, where it used to be that you got one release each year. Now they're doing releases and they do it within maybe 3 months, 6 months at the most. So deleting cache temp files sometimes fixes display issues. Notify me when updates. Those are pretty obvious. Use advanced tools. We know that we have to have that on. At startup, you can open a file. In this particular case, I might be tempted to just open my launcher. In fact, I haven't used this, and I'll probably turn this on because my launcher is the way that I get into any of the myriad of tools that I use. Developer tools, solutions I'm working on, my own solutions, everything, because it allows me full control of the experience rather than delegating that to Claris. HTTPS tunneling, I'm not currently using that, but it does need to be turned on if you're going to use it. Rather than using FileMaker's native 5003 port number, it uses 443, which is allowed through corporate firewalls. It has to be turned on both for server and for the client in order for it to work. On server, 5003 is still used between server and files, and I believe if you've got second machines or whatever, this is just from the client to actually getting the server. Layout. I do not always lock tools. I do not save. I do save layout changes. So ultimately, when FileMaker asks me this the first time when I leave a layout mode, this gets unchecked for me. I do not add newly defined fields. I never want FileMaker to mess with my layouts and update layouts when the schema changes. This is a relatively new one. You can also turn this off. This deals with, FileMaker has this thing, Vince Bonanno did a really good video called FileMaker Force Fields or something like that. FileMaker trying to be an easy-to-use environment for building a database system. When you had a field that you named it, FileMaker will automatically create a label. It will automatically create a table occurrence for your tables. And if you renamed one, or there was some magical incantation that you had to do where you would rename it, and that renaming will change or break this association that FileMaker has internally, where if you rename the field, the label also gets renamed if it's within a certain spatial distance on the layout. It's crazy. Some of the changes that are there underneath. Turning these off just gives you ultimate authority and control. Memory, you can bump this if you want. I will go to 512. Doing a massively large number like 124, I've heard that it doesn't give you much benefits. You don't need to go super, super high. It just really depends. Doing local development here, having a little bit of a higher cache does mean that things will go so fast, a little bit faster, but you're already going so fast because everything's local on your machine as it is. And saving cache contents, there's rarely, before you get into this type of situation where you are actually adjusting a time frame and bumping it out from a standpoint of caching, FileMaker has really good idle time management. So I would be interested to know if anybody's actually even using this. If you ever have used this and what the reasoning was, add a comment below. Shortcuts, this specifically deals with iOS and its use of shortcuts with regards to FileMaker Go. So we're not interested here on the desktop. Plugins, we've gone through that in the previous video. The go-to plugin that I will not develop without FileMaker is MBS plugin. I also use Bbox. Base Elements, as I've used more and more, MBS plugin is fading for me. Scriptmaster, if I need ultimate control, I will use this, but this does install Java and allows you to use Groovy as a language. You can see that right here. But most critically, on this particular dialog, we want to turn this off. It is still enabled. I don't know why. The only time we would ever want to allow FileMaker to install plugins is when we know it's actually happening. And just as I mentioned, the Reveal plugin, we've already talked about that. Each plugin, you can see, either will or will not have a configuration dialog box. Bbox does not use it. Base Elements does not. Scriptmaster actually just, I believe, shows their information. In this particular case, it's just showing a license key and the fact that it's... But you can see that because this dialog looks different, it's using Java to actually render this dialog. Scriptmaster is Java-based, Java Groovy. And then the MBS plugin right here, if I click Configure, Christian has a ton of these. I have a video on YouTube. If you want to know about all these different settings, just search on YouTube. And I talk about all the different settings and how incredibly cool the MBS plugin is. Now, finally, what's really critical here is in recent years, FileMaker has had to do a lot of different things that are security related, where there were little sneaky backdoors into FileMaker. And one of them, you can see, is what are permitted URLs with regards to whether the path is, or the connection is encrypted or not, and you're able to do that. You can clear all of these, which in this particular case, I can do that because it doesn't matter in my settings. But most importantly, down at the bottom, here's another one that I would turn on. Warn me before an FMP URL opens a file. I like to know when things are happening as a developer. I do not want a situation where something is going to actually take control, install a plugin, do something that I am unaware of. So now that we've done that, the next critical thing that we go to is the file settings. So we have our application settings, which controls our environment, but now we have each file that we develop or work with in FileMaker has its own settings. I have a shortcut key that I set to that, but my shortcut keys are not turned on yet. I will be moving those into this particular file as we work through the solution. And I will show you, I have other videos. Again, search YouTube, search the FileMaker Magazine website for the shortcut keys that I use, because it really enhances your FileMaker environment, because FileMaker does not, as of this time, allow you to override or set your own menu commands on menus. Other applications do. I wish they would do it, but alas, they do not. So going to the file, this is the all critical file options. Every FileMaker file has file options. And in recent years, this one in particular has become a little bit more critical, and that is specifying on a given file what is the minimum version that is required. Otherwise, that file won't open. So as FileMaker moves forward, when they add new things in and you take advantage of them, you of course don't want users to be able to open older files with newer functionality that an older version of FileMaker can't even access and use. You can see that because this is 13, it is a really old file that I've been using for a long time. If I wanted this to be something more compatible, I'd probably do this to 20.0 or 21 or whatever it is that you have to have in order to open this. But for the sake of nostalgia, I'm just going to leave that at 13 because it doesn't bother me. Now, of course, you can log into this file by default using a given count. If the guest is enabled, that will be there. Otherwise, account name and password. You can allow the stored credentials for this file, and on iOS, you can require the iOS passcode, which may be Face ID, which is actually pretty nice. You can show the sign-in fields even when OAuth or Active Directory is enabled. You can also specify a switch to layout. Now, this is one thing that I set on most every file. It is the very first thing that FileMaker's code, that FileMaker itself is going to use in order to determine where it starts. Regardless of whether you have a startup script, and that script is going to go to a layout, FileMaker, using this option in the file options, will start on this layout. Now, we're going to find this out as we develop this solution, that one of the things that we do is, I talked about this probably 20 years ago. It was, I used the words low impact startup. We want to put the user in a position where when the file starts, there's not a whole lot of things going on. low impact. And that's what using a dedicated startup table does for us. That dedicated startup table can literally have nothing in it. No records, not a lot of fields. In fact, just one at a bare minimum, maybe a few others. And that's what we're interested in doing because it basically makes startup the best possible scenario. We can hide all toolbars within this particular file. Then we go on to icon. This is where we can control the look. I forget what it is in here. You can use these defaults. Again, this is FileMaker doing things without anticipating the future. They put things in when they develop it without thinking, okay, is this still going to apply 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? They could have easily made this into a setting that could be controlled and coming from a dedicated folder that they expose to developers. And if they did that, then we would be able to have our own, what would show here is a catalog of icons that we want to use for ourselves. But instead, we get these fixed values that are probably coming from the inside of the actual application. Spelling, you're going to know whether you need that. Super simple. I hate beeping. Of course, you can do that if you want. Indicate questionable words. This is an interesting thing to know, but this setting right here is all files. But within each file, within the inspector, there is a place where on a field-by-field basis, you can turn off what FileMaker uses in order to indicate the questionable words with regards to whatever dictionary is loaded or installed based on the language being used for that particular version of FileMaker. And we'll see that when we are down looking at the property and the inspector. Text, we've got all of our different settings for smart quotes versus not. I don't like to use smart quotes, so I leave that turned off. Asian language, Roman language, line breaking. Sure, we'll leave those on. Then we've got system settings. This also is something that is controlled and managed. You can control it within the inspector, but we have the ability here to change these based on when the file starts up. So when the file starts up, as we're going to see on almost every FileMaker solution, I can't think of a FileMaker solution where you would not want to take advantage of a startup script, meaning do what you want to do for that file when that file starts up. We're going to see that when we go to script triggers, this very next section. One of the very first things or steps that we want to put in that startup script is set system locale, or to use whatever the local system is. Now, we are developing solutions that affect many different languages at oftentimes. You may be using just your language, but I tell you what, that one time that somebody wants to use a different language, that's when you get bitten by it, and it's so easy to just put it in your startup script. So we'll use our current system settings. If my system changed from English to Spanish, then if I set in my startup script to use the system locale, it would switch from using periods, say for the decimal point, to using commas. Or it would switch the date from putting the day in front of the month or the month in front of the day. It would make that switch in terms of what FileMaker would display. So now we get to script triggers, and this is where on every file, if you have a file that does not use the on first window open, I would be shocked. It is absolutely critical and essential that this one script be enabled on pretty much any and every FileMaker file. Now, whether you're going to do something when the file closes, which would be cleanup, writing to a log, etc., that's up to you whether you want to use the on last window close. Now, we do get some features, one in particular, on window transaction. When this was introduced, this allowed us to basically take control of what happens when users are going to do what are called CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. So if you've not heard of CRUD, you're unfamiliar, you're a beginning FileMaker developer, a transaction is we want something to happen as an all or nothing process. You all need to succeed or you all fail. And that is where the on window transaction, it allowed us to tie a script to that particular process when we're going to be using transactions. On window open and on window close, these are two things that I have rarely used. I have used them a few times, but truth be told, I wouldn't really worry about them. Really, the most critical are this one, and then this one, if you want to ensure things are happening for sure. And then if you're doing some type of cleanup operation, this one right here. If you were doing anything with mobile, then this is one that you could use. But for the most part, this, and this, you can sort of safely ignore as a FileMaker developer. You'll know if you need to use them. And this one we will become familiar with, and we will be setting a script as well as a field on a given file in terms of what we want to have and use when a transaction happens. Again, if you want to jump ahead, you can go search the magazine website for transactions or search YouTube here, and we'll talk about that. And we can see that it uses JSON, which we'll get into within this series. But that is what we have when we talk about setting up our settings for our environment. That is the FileMaker settings, and then setting up the settings for a file and what we're going to do and how I like to develop my files. Again, FileMaker Server. You're going to be getting the developer subscription. It's $200 now. It gets you FileMaker. It gets you FileMaker Server. That is what you want to do when you are developing. If you just have a regular copy of FileMaker and you're doing your development locally and FileMaker crashes on you and can put corruption into your file, that's really just not a good way to develop in a modern FileMaker development world. So as always, and until next video, I'd like to wish you much luck and happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.